Pyzdek Institute.
So again, the topic of today is continuous innovation and improvement using Lean Six Sigma. And Lean Six Sigma has long been known for process and operational improvement, and we can also use it for innovation. So IBM conducted a study called the Global CEO Study, where they talked to thousands of chief executive officers around the world and found that the CEOs believe that the innovation is a top priority for their companies, but they face many obstacles. A lot of us working in organizations have a very inflated perspective of the power of the chief executive. If you work with chief executives closely, you'll see that they have to struggle to get things done in their organization, much like anybody else. And the obstacles they reported to innovating were an unsupportive culture and climate. Basically, people like to maintain the status quo. It seems to be something natural to the human being. Lack of processes. So the process of looking for and implementing and deploying innovations is difficult to put together. A lack of discipline. We tend to focus on what we're currently doing more so than on the innovation. Innovation and new products look like they're less important than the current process until time goes by and you see in retrospect that you should have been doing the innovation. And a rigid organizational mindset. What you learn in business school is how to manage an organization functionally. And when you do that, you create silos and you give people control over those silos. And the people are likely to defend their turf and try to maintain the status quo, maintain their budgets. It turns out that all of these are obstacles addressed by Lean Six Sigma. Those of you who are black belts, green belts, or yellow belts know that what we do when we pursue Six Sigma process improvements is that we address all these issues because they don't just relate to innovation, they relate to change. And change is a key part of innovation, and it's also a key part of process improvement. So these chief executives, many of these chief executives that were spoken to by IBM, in fact, overcame these obstacles by using the Lean Six Sigma approach that they'd been using to improve operations. Lean Six Sigma then comes in two flavors: the operational Lean Six Sigma, which of course is a merger of Lean and Six Sigma. I think of Lean in an elevator speech kind of way as something that we use to redesign work and to redesign value streams or to create value streams to maximize the creation of value and minimize waste. And we're talking about existing products and services. Six Sigma is something that I think of as focusing on elimination of waste. Back in the original days, Six Sigma's primary metric was defects per million opportunities, and that, of course, is clearly a focus on eliminating waste, and also to eliminate variation. We have a great deal of our time is spent trying to study the causes of variation, and to create a process that's very consistent and, of course, a process that meets or exceeds the customer requirements. And what we're doing is we're focusing with traditional Lean Six Sigma on doing things right. Advanced Lean Six Sigma, what we're going to do is apply the approach, not unmodified, but fairly close to the way we apply it in operations. We're going to apply it to innovation as well. We're going to deliberately extend the scope. When we talk about meeting or exceeding customer requirements, that means we know what the customers want. And it also means we learn about show me, follow me home, Gemba, and other ways to get customer needs and requirements that the customers don't expressly tell us about. So we end up with Lean Six Sigma having a very deep knowledge of what customers do and how they do it. And with Lean Six Sigma, we're going to leverage this deep knowledge to innovate. And again, the thumbnail, the elevator speech is that operational Lean Six Sigma looks at doing things right. Advanced innovation Lean Six Sigma looks at doing the right things. If you're working in Lean Six Sigma, if you're a change agent, don't mean this as an insult, but you're different. And you're different in a lot of very good ways. Lean Six Sigma people are fact and data driven. When we hear a statement from a person, we generally don't accept it as fact. We look at it as a hypothesis, something that we want to test. And we're going to test it by collecting facts and data and seeing if the hypothesis holds up under those tests. We're very customer focused. The customer is equal among stakeholders. So even though in Lean Six Sigma we strive for balance of stakeholder needs, we understand that the customer being outside the organization and involved in the organization from a perspective where they have competitors they can go to are they're first among equals, you might say. We know how to get the voice of the customer, which we call VOC, and we know how to go beyond the voice of the customer to identify what the customers want that they may not tell us, that they may not even know they want. We're different in that we think of organizations as systems of processes. So functional organizations, we understand, are not silos. They exist to serve stakeholders and to enable core processes. And a core process is a process that serves the customer. We also think differently than other people about variation. Most people react to all variation as something that requires a response, but we realize that some variation does not require an immediate response and that in fact it's tampering if we react to variation improperly. So some variation we understand requires a redesign of the system to eliminate. We know that results are not just acts of God or acts of nature, but they're produced by systems. And they're also usually not acts of individuals. They're not malicious if they're bad. They're not a sign that you have an extremely super talent if the results are good. But most of the results are the result of the system being used. Now, not entirely. I mean, I'm a rugged individualist at heart, so I understand that, Steve Jobs had an impact that was beyond the system involved in Apple. But I also know that Steve Jobs' impact was leveraged by the fact that he had the right systems in place at Apple to make innovation work. We know that outcomes have causes, and we understand about transfer functions that link causes to outcomes. So processes are transfer functions. On one end we have inputs, on the other end we have outputs. And in between, we have processes that convert these inputs into outputs of a greater value. You'll find that people who are not trained change agents tend to really get buried with information. They have too many metrics. They don't know how to identify the critical few. But Lean Six Sigma people do know how to do that. And we know how to organize people for change. So in black belt or green belt training, if you actually look at the hours spent, you'll find that although you spend some time on statistics, you spend even more time on things like project management, project identification, identifying sponsors, finding and recruiting team members, going through the group process, and so on. So we know how to make change happen with people. This is a real quick overview of where Lean Six Sigma came from, the evolution of it. It started in the 20s and 30s. Prior to the 20s, by the way, quality was pretty much inspection driven. We made things, they made things and then looked at them to see if they were any good. Starting in 1919, Walter Schuhart moved the focus towards process thinking and statistical process control. And that's where the idea of two different kinds of variation from special causes that should be acted upon at once and common causes that required system improvements came from Dr. Schuhart. In the 40s, that was unfortunately an era of World War. We moved the focus at that time to actually looking at product sampling. We didn't really have time to make long-term process improvements in statistical quality control, where we looked at scientific sampling of product became the dominant processing quality approach. In the 50s, 3 Americans went to Japan and taught them total quality control. W. Edwards Deming, Joseph N. Juran, and Armand Feigenbaum, who wrote the book Total Quality Control. Juran wrote the Quality Control Handbook, and Deming was the person who did a lot of coaching and instructing of Japanese executives, and the Japanese named their highest prize after Dr. Deming, the Deming Prize. In the 60s and 70s, Toyota's production VP Taiichi Ono created the Toyota production system, and Toyota and other companies led the way to what's been called the Japanese economic miracle, where Japan emerged from status as an undeveloped third world country to a major player on the international economic stage. In the 80s, lots of things happened. Total quality management, the Japanese expanded the Toyota production system, and we all became aware of things like just-in-time, pull systems, Kanban, Ion-Dan, and all these Japanese words, Hoshinkanri, which is management deployment, policy deployment, and I'll show you where we integrate these things in a later slide. Continuous improvement was the rage. Six Sigma got its start by Motorola, and Kaizen, the Japanese approach to continuous improvement, which is something of, it's been Americanized from something gradual to something that's produced in surges, I'd say, with Kaizen events. In the 1990s, some MIT professors went over to figure out why Toyota was producing automobiles at something like 1/3 the cost per square foot and per employee, and wrote the book, The Machine That Changed the World, that introduced the American business person to the lean approach used by Toyota. And complete process redesign, innovation, process reengineering was a very popular approach. And in the 2000s, Lean and Six Sigma became merged, and that's where we are today. Okay, so here's what the CEOs who have used Lean Six Sigma for innovation have done. These are the things that research shows were their keys to success. First of all, it was a deliberate extension of the scope of Six Sigma to include innovation and strategy. So Six Sigma wasn't designed for this purpose, but what I found over the years is that those of us who work in Lean Six Sigma really owe a great debt to top leaders and CEOs, because they move us forward in, for example, a CEO was really responsible for Six Sigma, Bob Galvin at Motorola. Ford's CEO was responsible for TQM and so on. And what the CEOs have done lately is that they've looked at the Six Sigma approach, they've looked at their strategic planning and innovation issues and said, this can apply here, and they've done it deliberately. What Six Sigma has to offer is rigor. If you've been to these off-site strategic planning sessions, you'll know a lot of it involves pie-in-the-sky thinking about how things are going to be many, many years out. And very little time is spent devoted to actually how we're going to get to these visions. And Six Sigma provides that bridge by giving a rigorous framework for change. The leaders develop these intimate customer relationships that we talk about in Six Sigma to a greater extent. So, for example, a lot of the companies cut out the middleman, the salespeople, and put their change agents and engineers directly in contact with the customers at the customer's workplace so that they can see what customers are doing and find ways to help the customer do things right. The innovation is not based on opinion. It's based on facts and data, one of the hallmarks of Lean Six Sigma. Leaders learn how to focus on the critical few explicit objectives. So explicit's a key phrase here, and it's an objective that has a operational definition. They use their leadership vision to unify the organization. So essentially, everybody knows where the organization's headed, where they'd like to be in 2 years and further down the line. And the leaders link their vision to the needs of the customer. So the 2 bullets above about getting a deep understanding of customer needs, and then articulating a vision were merged, and these two things were linked together, and I'll show you how in a minute. Anybody who's been in a Lean Six Sigma organization, and that's as opposed to some poor loner out there who's trying to get Lean Six Sigma to work without the organization being on board, understands that Lean Six Sigma creates a different culture. What we do is we take typically 1% of the human resources and we change the full-time job of this group. And to make that happen, the culture of the organization has to change. It has to embrace the idea of process improvement as change. Well, innovation is also change, so it's a variation on the same theme. A culture of change, of course, will develop the skill set needed and develop the pool of change agents that will actually make this change happen. CEOs who use this approach identify the organization's core processes and enabling functions. And again, a core process is a process that serves customers directly, and enabling functions are functions that provide services to all core processes, such as IT and quality and accounting and so on. They also create organizational excellence leadership teams. Now, this is different. We used to call these process excellence leadership teams, but of course, when you expand the scope to include innovation, you have to change the name to reflect that different scope. Finally, the leaders need to change what needs to be changed to make the organization capable of achieving the organization's vision. One thing I found is really a joy when you're working with CEOs is that most of the problems that we look at in a typical process or typical environment really don't occur when you get the chief executive involved. So what happens then is the chief executive will simply direct people to devise new systems and new approaches, and the obstacles just melt away. So the CEO and his staff being on board really changes the nature of working in Lean Six Sigma in these organizations. The successful companies use Lean Six Sigma to create innovation. So essentially what they do is they treat the expressed and latent needs of the customers as a why, as a goal, something they want to accomplish, and use Lean Six Sigma's approach to drill down to root causes, things that need to change to create that new and improved process and product. They also use these innovations to acquire new customers and investors. There's ample evidence that financial markets respond to Lean Six Sigma innovations. If you go through the analysis, the financial analyses of the companies that are doing this, you'll see that the investors focus on this. And when a company states we're going to, let's say, generate X amount of income from new products in the upcoming 12 months, the investment community holds them to it. So they base their estimates of what the company's worth is on these predictions and forecasts, and they will increase their estimation of what that company's worth, but then you do have to deliver. Thought I'd give you a case study. This is Caterpillar Corporation. In the year 2000, Caterpillar had 27 business units and 72,000 employees on 6 continents that encompassed diverse cultures and languages. So they're a big company. I think when you look at this perspective, you can see the challenge for senior leadership in trying to create change. Caterpillar had 4 years of flat revenues. If you study economics, what you'll find is that over time, according to Adam Smith, marginal cost equals price, and that means profits go to zero. So he who stands still moves backwards. You have to innovate to keep your profit margins. So to break out of this, the leadership decided they needed to change the mindset and chose Lean Six Sigma to do this. And by the way, most of these organizations who are doing this, they call their initiative Six Sigma, but when you look at what they're doing, it included Lean, and it's, from a technical point of view, Lean Six Sigma. So Caterpillar CEO applied Six Sigma to strategic planning. Now, wasn't working with Caterpillar, but I'm going to show you my approach to doing this, and it's included in the Six Sigma handbook. They also deliberately expanded the scope to include creating continuous customer-driven innovation. So Six Sigma wasn't going to be just for operational improvement anymore, but they were making the scope bigger. The initial effort involved training 4,200 employees as change agents, and that's 6% of their workforce. And that's quite a bit. As I say, the typical Lean Six Sigma organization that embraces it fully will train about 1% of the workforce, and that varies from 0.5% to 1.5%. So Caterpillar really made a much bigger commitment in terms of employee training. Now, the first year, these newly trained people executed 1,100 projects, and that's pretty low. That's one project for every 4 employees. So what I suspect, and I haven't contacted Caterpillar to verify it, but my guess is that the number of 4,200 probably was not all belts. That I'm guessing that a lot of these folks were oriented. They received orientation training, but not deep project execution training. The projects were not all traditional operational improvement and process improvement projects. They included new products. R&D was revamped to put engineers in direct contact with customers. And I've got some qualms about applying Lean Six Sigma in pure research, but certainly in development and in getting ideas for new products, it has a role. Caterpillar also used the theory of constraints, and they called their approach systematically debottlenecking processes. So essentially, they looked for things that were constraining their processes from producing greater throughput and address these things using the theory of constraints approach. And we incorporate the theory of constraints in Lean Six Sigma training where it's needed. The results, well, very impressive results. Their initial costs, and again, they trained 4,200 employees and did 1,100 projects. They covered the costs in less than the first year. Their profits went up. They started to achieve record profits, and their market share increased. So they achieved their goals, and of course, this is ongoing. So this is the approach that I offer for Lean Six Sigma, linking Lean Six Sigma with strategy. So organizations begin with a vision or a dream. And it's very important that you have this, because if you don't have this, you don't have what Deming calls a constancy of purpose. And an organization without a purpose is doomed. It's been a long time since I've seen an update, but a few years ago, there was a study of Fortune 500 companies, and they found that the average life expectancy of a company in the Fortune 500 was about 7 years. So just because you're successful don't mean you will remain successful, and this vision and dream is an important way to maintain people's focus. You need stakeholders to buy into your vision. You need people to invest in it, finance, people to work to create your vision, and you need customers who put down hard cash to buy it if you're in a for-profit organization, or you need users of your services if you're in a public sector or nonprofit organization. The leadership needs to develop strategies, which is an outline of how they're going to create this vision. And the strategies need to be operationalized with metrics. And the approach that's most common is the balanced scorecard. And the balance is between stakeholder groups. You also need balance, by the way, short-term, long-term. So balance is a key component of Lean Six Sigma, be it the strategic or the operational version. There are 2 different kinds of metrics on the balanced scorecard. The key requirement metrics are those that must be competitive, and that's the vast bulk of your metrics. But there are a critical few metrics that have to be best in class, and they're called differentiators. And they're called that because in the customer's mind, these are going to be the things that make the customer think about you. So when the customer thinks of your organization as different from the others, it's going to be because you excel on these differentiator metrics. The leadership doesn't really have the time to look at all the key requirements. There'll be far too many of them to focus on, but they do want to look at those that are dangerously non-competitive. So key requirements with big gaps, along with differentiators, are on what we call the leadership dashboard. And the dashboard are the critical few metrics that the senior leaders need to pay attention to. The differentiators will be there for a period of time, but the big gap key requirements will come and go as they're addressed. The dashboard is used to create change and to drive change, and the strategic change projects are an approach to doing that. These are not all Lean Six Sigma projects, so they include just operational activities, departmental and functional activities, just do projects, workouts, and a variety of other approaches. But Lean Six Sigma projects are there, and I'll show you how we get to those. Finally, there's a feedback loop. So the dashboard is used to determine if the strategies are effective. And you'll see that this is a transfer function, believe it or not. And I'm going to show you another perspective that's going to make that easier to spot. So we have to link strategies to the voices. We talked many times about how we have to have deep understanding of the customer, and we have to use that to drive innovation. Here's how that's done. First of all, we get the voice by actually talking to the stakeholders and looking at what the stakeholders want. And so there's your shareholders are actually very vocal. There's much published, much analysis of what stakeholders are looking for from your companies. And all you need to do is, tap into the research reports that are being produced on an ongoing basis for your organization to see that. Typically, what shareholders are interested in is financial performance. And of course, there are two ways to deal with that. One is to improve the revenue, that's your top line. And the other is to improve your bottom line. And you'll do that by producing more for a given amount of input. So that's a productivity strategy. Customers, typically an organization will choose a customer value proposition and that they're going to differentiate themselves with. Usually that's operational excellence. So if you're working with a company that's really good in that, say for example, Walmart gets their costs down by having operations that find the best price and the best suppliers. Customer intimacy. So there are many organizations that excel at getting close to the customer and really giving them special customized service. And finally, there are organizations that choose to excel by producing superior products or services. By the way, if you choosing one to excel at doesn't mean you ignore the other two. It means that you are at least competitive with the other two, but that's not what the customer is going to think about when they think about you. Employees, your third important stakeholder group. They have to work with these internal processes, and they're also concerned about their personal learning and growth. So the work that they need to do is a big driver of their perceived value of working with you. Of course, that includes the money that they get for it, but also their learning and growth opportunities. So when you put all this together, you can see that there's a linkage. These are not competing interests. Your stakeholders are looking for things that actually relate to one another. So if you improve internal process excellence, employee value is driven primarily by that, but customer value is as well. And when you improve the employee and customer value, you obtain and retain the best employees, and you have loyal customers. That, of course, helps drive financial performance. So these are harmonious interests, and the leadership team has to seek and identify the harmony of interest, be sure it's there. The dashed box shows a balanced scorecard. So even though typically balanced scorecards are not shown in this way, this is a model that shows that we have measurable outcomes on the right-hand side, and the metrics that we attach to these strategies on the balanced scorecard are going to give us measurable outcomes on the left-hand side. So every strategy is operationalized by at least one metric. And these metrics, as we said on the previous slide, fall into categories of key requirements and differentiators. The vast majority of the metrics are going to be key requirements. And if they're competitive, the leadership team does not need to focus on them and should not focus on them. The remaining metrics are differentiators or key requirements that have dangerous gaps, and those do require the leadership focus. But if you take away all the key requirements, you see that we've now evolved a critical few requirements that need to be part of the leadership focus. This is a much simpler model. So this part on the left is what the leadership needs to focus on, and that includes innovation. So the red ellipses are directly related to differentiators and innovation. We talked about Hoshin Kanri. I mentioned the term. Here's what's called a house of quality, a quality function deployment matrix, and that's part of policy deployment. So what we're doing here is we're taking the dashboard metric that is shown on the left-hand side of the rows, and we're relating it to what the functions do. And the functions, as I say, serve the core processes and the stakeholders, and this is a matrix that's going to show how they do that. So we have little symbols here where we show a very important relationship or correlation, a moderately important or low important relationship, little or no relationships indicated by a blank box. And we have scoring mechanisms and so on, so we can convert these relationships to weights. And that again helps us focus on the critical few. So now we're going to go a level down, and we're going to further sharpen the focus of the leadership team with this tool. That's all very abstract, and I wanted to concretize this by showing you what an actual company does, just to give you an idea of how this gets to be deployed. This company was a client, and what I was working with the person in charge of the core process, service, and support. So after the customer had purchased their product, he was in charge of providing after-sales service and support to the customers. And in particular, he was running a contact center to help address customer issues. So again, he has employees, customers, and other stakeholders. So he has multiple stakeholders that he's trying to serve. And it starts off with a high-level strategy, build performance excellence into their daily fiber, and he elaborates on that strategy so that the employees understand what the vision is. And then he measures it. So this is an operational segment where there is a strategy doesn't exist until it's been operationalized by how you're going to measure it. So each of these things, customer service, leverage the knowledge, and you see these are very high-level things, great customer experience and so on. But again, they're operationalized with specific metrics. So we don't just have pie-in-the-sky statements like we're going to provide a great customer service. We say, as indicated by these measurements. And that's a Lean Six Sigma contribution because we're facts and data people. And it's not enough to say, I think our customers are happy. And again, high-level goals and objectives and operationalized by metrics. So vision for his organization, again, this is a way of unifying everybody behind him. The Service and Tech Support Organization, or STS, is able to respond quickly and effectively to key opportunities to improve organizational performance. Again, that sounds very high level and abstract, but he's going to refine it with a problem statement, as we do in charters for projects. He does it for the organization at a much higher level. And then more specific objectives that are going to be used to create action. So I'm going to go very quickly through this slide because I see I've used up about 3/4 of the hour. Here's the Lean Six Sigma leadership process that's used for innovation and improvement. First, you organize, determine the outcomes you're after and the metrics that will operationalize them, identify the core processes, assign owners, and identify the drivers of the outcomes from these processes. Plan for innovation and improvement, not just improvement, and then innovate or improve. Now this is an L1 map, very high level map. Let's drill down one level to L2. So organizing for excellence means establishing the excellence leadership team, conducting excellence leadership team workshops to show these people what their new responsibilities are, scheduling regular meetings to track performance and projects and change, initiate dashboard reviews, so these are the concrete metrics that are going to be looked at in these meetings, initiate project reviews, these are going to drive the outcomes on your dashboard, determine key outcomes and metrics involve listing your goals and strategies, we saw a couple slides about that. Determine the list or use the list of strategies and goals to determine differentiators for your business. Plot these over time and benchmark them with excellent companies. Use this list to determine the key requirements for your business and plot them over time. Identify gaps. So these are differentiators, the second bullet, and these are key requirements and requirements with gaps. Those are going to go on your scorecard and your dashboards. Then identify the core processes. That's an L1 map like this one of your core processes. So how does your organization create value for customers and serve customers? Enabling processes, what are the things that make it possible to perform the activities in the core process? Assign owners of these processes. Link the processes to your scorecard and dashboard. So basically this is a drill down. Map the processes to an actionable level. As we're doing here with L2, usually you have to go down to level 3 or 4 to really be able to act on these things. Create COPUS maps. That's customer, output, process, input, and supplier. It's SIPOC spelled backwards. Basically, this is an end-to-end view of the process that goes from the customer to the supplier. Determine the critical to quality metrics. Generate improvement plans for these metrics, generate innovation plans for the metrics, validate the plans, which means map these plans back to these dashboard metrics that you created. Where was our dashboard? Well, we had process dashboards, the third bullet under the third chevron, and we also have dashboards that link to the top level goals under the second chevron. So we're going to map all the projects back to make sure that we haven't somehow broken the linkage. Get shared vision on these plans and identify how best to execute these plans. So again, we have Just Do It projects, Six Sigma improvement projects, innovation projects, and so on. To execute these things, identify the priorities, find sponsors, then create the problem statement, business case, and draft charters. Select people to lead the teams and get them kicked off. That's a leadership responsibility. And establish a schedule for reviewing the projects, which, by the way, takes us all the way back. I don't know if you can see my little cursor arrow, but it takes you all the way back to the very first chevron. So it's a closed loop process. And we're also going to identify non-project related activities, Kaizens, and continuous improvement, and so on. So finally, you're going to review your dashboards. Again, that's back to the first chevron. Then you're going to review your strategy. And the reason you're going to do that is that if you're moving all the metrics in the right direction on the dashboard and you're not getting the result you expected to get, that probably indicates that your strategy is ineffective. You need to modify the strategy. So all taken together, this is a new framework for achieving excellence, and excellence being defined as innovation and improvement. There's your feedback loop. The innovate and improve links back to the key metrics and outcomes. If you're moving these in the right direction and your strategy is correct, you'll move toward your vision. So here's a sample, a concrete sample of how this was done in service and technical support. Again, very high level, and the leader I was working with is in charge of service and support. So this is an L1 map of the core processes. For the process he is concerned with, he did a drill down, and the drill down then went down. So he's at level 3, which for us would be level 1. So typically, the leadership works at very high levels. Again, he assigns people who own these sub-processes, and they are responsible for identifying what that process is going to do, and the leader is responsible for buying off on that. So they're the high-level metrics. The little red arrow is the leadership responsibility. So the top level leader is taking chevron number 5 on as the owner. Another drill down. So we're looking down at drill down to each of the chevrons on the previous slide. So we're getting close. And again, each of these are processes that need to be assigned owners and measured and so on, and sometimes drilled down even further with these people. So here's the process excellence project flow. It starts with the leadership council, goes through a financial filter and identify project charters, and these are submitted through green belts and black belts who have been commissioned by the process owners to pursue these projects. Goes through another finance screen, and it's presented to the leadership council, and they recommend which projects will get funding and which will go ahead. Those that go ahead, those that don't go ahead, by the way, they're not just thrown away. The feedback is used to recreate the charters. Belts then work on these projects, and they give their reports on progress back to the departmental leaders, and the whole process repeats. So now, a little later in the game, any questions?